Not that long ago, I was sitting in front of my computer with a PDF form open, waiting for me to complete it. The provincial government needed a learning project, which is basically a learning plan for the year. Planning feels foreign to how we actually learn. Our learning doesn't happen in lines or schedules. It tinkers, it wanders, it loops back, it grows in spirals. It begins with curiosity, with small moments that can't be planned, neither predicted. How do you translate, let alone capture that, in a form that expects outcomes and objectives? How do you translate the spiral of learning into something legible to the system? I continue reading the form. One of the first things that asked me was to describe our educational approach. I'm aware that it's best to avoid the terms unschooling or child-led learning, and instead call it project-led learning, for example. But it doesn't feel right to me. Project-led learning is not exactly what we do. We learn by living life. And life to us is not just about completing a project or a series of projects. My child is aware we are completing this document for the government since he has been consulted and an active participant in it. And I know one day he will want to read it again. I don't want him to feel like we were hiding something. And I don't want to feel like that either. I don't want to hide the fact that human curiosity has been a legitimate way to learn for millennia. So I try to find words that feel true. Not performative, not polished, neither defiant nor confrontational, but true. This is such an integral part of his learning too. Anthropologists like Clifford Geertz talk about the translation of cultures, not just of words, but of worlds embedded in webs of meaning. This form, this learning project, is really a cultural text. It reveals what the system values: structure, progress, and measurement. It's not just a form, it's a cultural artifact of how the system perceives learning. It's also a cultural artifact that triggers all school habits in me at times. The need to sound right, legitimate, and on the right track. I realize I'm still unlearning something deeper, and that is the idea that learning needs validation. I'm noticing how much I want to prove that curiosity is enough, that being human is enough. And yet, not sounding legitimate also has the risk of being pushed into the constraints of a system that dismisses other ways of learning as inadequate. Living in an environment where homeschooling is regulated truly puts my own unlearning to a test. So I found myself, once again, between worlds. One that values curiosity and lived experience, and one that values structure and outcomes. Writing the learning project became a mirror of how we live in tension between different worlds. And yet, in the middle of that tension, I still believe there is hope that both worlds can be conciliated. And I communicated this briefly in our learning project. Because I truly believe that at the end of the day, there shouldn't be any conflict between my child's learning needs and what they call the basics. After all, the world of math, science, art, language, music, and more are all around us. Not just in a worksheet, not just in a textbook, not just in a classroom. I'm trying to find a bridge made with words that can pass through bureaucratic gates, yet still carry the truth of lived natural learning. So I try to articulate our learning approach in a language legible to the system without betraying the spirit of what we do. I chose to see the learning project as the map we offer to those who can't see our landscape from where they stand. However, while drafting that map, I refused to box my child in a series of specific activities that would constrain him, just to show we had a plan, no matter how much those activities would speak to his interest. This was perhaps the hardest part while conciliating my child's learning needs and government requirements in the learning project. I'm realizing natural learning is very fluid and is lived in the present. You cannot use a child's interest to write a future activity or plan to promise a learning outcome. While I could mention museum visits as part of the broad activities we would engage in for our learning project, I refuse to say, for example, we would visit X or Y exhibit to explore the world of technology. Because the decision of what happens during that museum visit belongs to my child and his curiosity, not to a predetermined activity in a checkbox for a learning plan that would make us miss a spontaneous learning moment that would accomplish a similar learning outcome and perhaps more. True story. The other day, we went to the Canadian Museum of History since the Children's Museum is also there. So I thought that was going to be our destination based on my child's recent interest. But something else in the Canadian Museum of History got his attention. And following his lead, we instead went to one of the main exhibits where we learned about indigenous peoples, geography, and much more. It often happens that one interest leads them to find patterns and parallels across interests, which in turn open the door to other learning opportunities. And chances are they are not in total conflict with the government competencies or requirements. If I would have committed in our learning project to visit a specific area at the Children's Museum that my child had shown an interest recently, for him to explore this or that in order to learn this or that, we would have missed this moment and made my child and us miserable in the process, always supposedly following his interests, except not in the present. Just to show the government we had a plan. So I refused to provide specific activities in our learning project. Because natural learning doesn't begin with a plan. It begins with curiosity, with small moments that are lived in the present, and hence can't be planned, neither predicted. And in that context, I would only go as far as to provide a broad idea of our activities to the government, leaving enough room for flexibility in order to ensure that his learning remains interest-driven. In that context, my role is to facilitate the environment by, for example, taking him to the museum, observing, being present, supporting and translating his spontaneous learning moments in a language the government can understand. My role is not to mandate those moments. Yet, in that translation, something always escapes. Something always gets lost. Something essential, wild, relational. That's why I'll keep writing these moments, because behind every report or document I have to submit to the government, there is a story that doesn't fit the forms. And that's one of the most meaningful parts of our learning I want to keep close to my heart. The form was completed, knowing it's only one translation of a much wider and richer reality. When I finally hit send, I imagine the person who will read it. Maybe they will feel a hint of that. Maybe they will pause at a phrase. Maybe, just maybe, something in it will remind them that learning can be relational, unpredictable, alive. Not mandated, neither delivered, but lived.